think one of the most popular mixes and combinations of recent times has to be F1 Dark and Thatcher's. This is something that I've been combining together ever since Thatcher's came about with Sonubaits, and it's just proved so successful in so many different scenarios. And I think it's because you can combine the ingredients there to get pretty much whatever you want out of something. And we've talked about it, you know, I've talked about it on the bank loads of times, but I thought it'd be great to actually show you so you can make the decisions and you can obviously decide what you want for your fishing. Because, you know, people do ask lots of times, you know, what about this venue and that venue? So this is going to be a nice little guide to that, how to do it bang right. So I think first of all, we need to touch on the F1. F1 is based around a crushed expander pellet. Now, at Sonubaits, or any bait company for that matter, we get to decide what our expander pellets are made of. So, like, then we crush them up. But it's, when we say a crushed expander, it's to give you guys an understanding of what type of ingredient that is. So we've got almost like a traditional type of crushed expander here with a fish meal content in it. The F1 Dark is a dark expander. Again, slightly different ingredients to make that. And the F1 Green is a green expander. And this has a really nice type of green dye in it that we use, which is actually, obviously all the dyes have to be food-based these days. And it's what makes them stand out from the crowd. Really high quality ingredients, crushed to be relatively fine. You know, if I had a pinky riddle here, that everything from this will go through a pinky riddle if I shake it off. So that's what you're looking at. Now, because they're expander based, it means when you mix them with water, they don't bind particularly well. I mean, they do bind and you can use them in their normal form. But when you mix them with water and you go to, say, put them in anything over about 3 or 4 foot deep, what you'll find is that ground bait will break up really fast. It's a nice ingredient for a method feeder, actually, because you can chuck it in and it breaks down really quickly because they don't really bind. So it's something that I use quite a bit. Maybe if I'm trying to stick my pellets together, something that is going to stick it, but not like glue. So again, perfect for that. But that's the main function of that. So if the venue you're going to, the first rule, if the venue you're going to is, say, under 3 foot deep, dead shallow, then really I'm quite happy using these ingredients on their own. I know, for example, when I'm tapping in pellets and people say, I want a bit of crush, I will use F1 Original. Now, it's like a nice golden colour, which is perfect for that type of, when you're doing that type of fishing. But because we put F1 flavouring in all these mixes, that F1 flavouring just makes it a little bit more bindy than a normal crushed expander, which is perfect because you get that little effect when it goes down in a little ball and then just breaks up and draws fish in. So I always think if my venue's shallow, F1 on its own is going to be a really great mix to use. The only downside to that is if I'm feeder fishing, I've obviously got to cast the feeder into the lake, and that means that there's an impact on the water. And if I mix this ground bait on its own, it's probably a bit too soft. It would be great and it would draw fish in, but I could, if I wanted to, say, stodge it up in my feeder, I couldn't do that. So that's where I need to look at using something else to sort of change the way my ground bait behaves. But that's the 3 types of F1. And then Thatcher's here, I've got the dark and the original. There is also Thatcher's green if you like that sort of colour. And Thatcher's, because it's part of the Pro range, it's a lot finer. It's a finer grind, and it's got some stronger fish meals in it as well. So the best way to describe Thatcher's is it's a lot stickier than, say, an F1 Original. If I was fishing in deep water, then something sticky, it would be great. But also, it's a lot stronger. And I've had a lot of success in recent matches actually using Thatcher's Dark on its own when I've literally been introducing like a golf ball. So I want to introduce something really strong and smelly, but not lots of ground bait. Or if I've wanted to hold together, like, let's say I've mixed some worms and I want to hold some worms together, this is great for it because the worms are going to make it over wet. This would be too spongy, but Thatcher's Dark just grips it a little bit more. So when I'm using small amounts of ground bait on its own, I actually find Thatcher's and Thatcher's Dark to be a really great mix to use because they're a lot stronger. Now, this is where I have to think about combining them, okay? So let's just give a few examples for you guys at home. If you're feeder fishing, like when I go to Tamar, right? Tamar's a classic example. It can be deep. It can be 15, 20 foot deep at Tamar. I need a ground bait that goes in to the bottom, but still breaks up and releases my bait. And my go-to combination is 2 parts of F1 and 1 part of Thatchers. So for example, I would get my 1 pint tub. I would put 2 lots of this into a bucket and 1 lot of Thatchers. Mix the 2 together. That would be the perfect combination. When I'm going to Tamar, the water's really clear. I'm a big fan of F1 Dark and Thatchers Dark. That combination is nice and dark. It means it's not too spooky, but also the green is great. I love green. I think that, I don't know what it is, the fish just love that colour. And actually, I almost find like green, sometimes dark ground baits, they turn a little bit pale, which is a bit strange. They just look it in the water. The green is actually green. So Thatchers Dark and F1 Green is a great combination. And this year when we won the Feeder Masters, I used F1 Green, 2 parts, and 1 part Thatchers Dark. That was my mix. Now, when I go to, say, Southfield Reservoir, which is a lot shallower, so at Southfield, it's only 3 foot deep. Your feeder goes in, it goes into the silt. It doesn't matter what feeder you've got on, it's so soft and silty. The last thing I want is a stodgy ground bait that wedges into the silt. I actually want my ground bait to come out pretty much straight away on impact. So what I tend to do when I go to Southfield is use like 3 or even 4 parts at times of the F1 Green or Dark, and then 1 part of Thatchers. Now, Southfield is really coloured. So often I find myself using like Thatchers Original. I don't go for the dark, so I go Thatchers Original and like F1 Green, or obviously for a very, very long time, F1 Dark. I just tend to mix it up really with how I feel. I honestly can't sit here and say dark is better than green. I just sometimes think if everybody's using dark, I might try green, or vice versa. Just see what sort of reaction I get, how I feel at the time. There's no real difference between the ingredients in these mix. It's just mainly the colour. So just that's really a choice of, I'm going to say up to you. But when it's clear, when it's really coloured, I tend to just go for the original and the green. And like I said, a lot less Thatchers. Now, I'm going to do something more current, and I'm going to mix it up for you now. I've had a lot of success recently on silverfish matches, fishing with the pole. And what we're doing a lot of the time is we're potting in like 1 or 2 tangerine sized balls of ground bait. So not massive amounts of ground bait, but not tiny amounts. And I'll probably look to top up regularly throughout the day, which means I'll end up feeding a relatively amount, not a large amount of ground bait, but an amount of ground bait. So to do that, and a lot of the time I'm going to places that are clear, I want a mix that's going to stick together. I want a mix that's going to be strong, but not too, not overly powerful. And based on everything I've told you there, and what I've been using for weeks and weeks, F1 Green and Thatchers. Okay, so when I'm using like I said, little tiny amounts, it's just Thatchers Dark on its own. But when I'm going to most of these places, take like, let's say like a Meadowlands or a Barston or any of those sort of places where I'm going to pop 2, 3, 4 balls in. I'm combining the 2 because I don't want to use Thatchers Dark on its own because I think it'll be a bit too powerful. So I'm going to mix it up for you here, just like I've been doing. I always do it on the morning of the match. So like literally get up in the morning. I've already measured out the ground bait because I'm a bit like that. So I'll literally put, there you go, I've got like a pint in there of ground bait. That's the green. Get the dark. Same thing. And you can see it's a finer mix there. Lovely colour. It's not a black colour. It's a dark. It's like a dark brown. I love that colour. If I could pick one colour of ground bait, it would be that. That's the sort of tone I tend to go for a lot. Obviously mix the 2 dry ingredients together properly first, like so, which is great, and then add your water. Now you've got to bear in mind that a lot of the time we talk about oversaturating ground baits. Be careful because Thatchers is very fine, and I've got at least half Thatchers in there, so I don't want it to be I don't want it to go to clag. I almost want to just get it as damp as I can possibly get it without sort of ruining it, if you like. So let's just give that a bit of a blitz. Yeah, that can definitely take more. No, that's how I want it. So it's sort of like as damp as you would probably want it for fishing. It's going to dry out a lot, don't forget, but it's not that sort of stodge that you've seen me do on more expander based ground bait. So there we go. And what I will tend to do, as soon as I've mixed that, I'll push that through a ground bait riddle just to get rid of all the, not to get rid, just to distribute all the water through the mix. That's the most important thing. And look, that for me, you're not getting a better colour ground bait than that. Like a dark green, if you like, a very dark green. You can see there's plenty of food in there, but it's a mix that it really does bind. So if I want to make a nice firm ball, look, I can do. If I want to make a ball a little bit softer, just with a one nipper, I can, and it'll go down where I want it to. It's a beautiful mix for pole fishing, that is. It's a mix that I don't, when I'm fishing with a feeder, I rarely use 50-50. I always have more F1 in my mix because I want it to break up. And when you're using a feeder, you've got to have something that can survive the impact but still break up. But when you're using a pole and you're in control of how you can nip it, that's going to be absolutely perfect. And I know you guys can't smell it, so I'm going to tell you, it stinks. It's really strong. It's a nice, strong ground bait. It's going to draw fish into my peg. 2 or 3 balls of this, odd dead maggot in it. You're going to have a great day's fishing. And don't forget, I know that I talked about it for silver matches as well. I've never hooked as many carp in as I have in the last 2 months silverfish fishing. So it tells me that this is a brilliant way of fishing for carp as well. One ball like this, fishing maggots over the top, you're going to have some great results. That's a nice little look at F1 and Thatchers, how to get those right. So hopefully you can catch more fish.